When you imagine food, what do you see?
Endless squares of cropland all around us.
A basket brimming with fresh vegetables.
Chocolate.
Standing elbow deep in a tank full of blistered loquat juice drunk on last year's loquat wine.
I see a garden alive with colors.
Fortunately for me, I don't have to imagine it. Food's all around me these days. I've got good access to it.
I see bread. We're a bread household, my husband and me. Some cheese.
I see my farm.
And for me, preparing food is a loving act.
Scene 1. Home.
So, when we closed on the farmland, it was December 29th. Even though it was like a really gray, cold day, my husband and I went out to the land. The back end of the parcel was all woods with a pond. We set up a little picnic, and I mean, it was cold. It really wasn't a pleasant day like I had envisioned. There wasn't snow, so it was all brown and gray. There's always birds out there, though. And we were just really quiet and listening. I wasn't scared at all. It was lovely, just lovely.
As an old farmer and someone involved in state and county agricultural policy, I think the most concerning thing I've seen in the last few decades is the consolidation of corporate control in agriculture. Farms get fewer and fewer and bigger. You need more and more purchased inputs, which means more control to the corporations who supply those. And you get the devastation of towns across the Midwest, the emptying, if you will, of rural America. The only way to fix that is with agriculture, with getting more people back on the land, and with keeping more of the wealth we create on a farm in our own communities. I read that only 15% of the profit in our food system goes to those who produce raw materials. 85% goes to those who value add and market materials. How can farmers work with 15%?
I grew up 30 miles north of Champaign, Urbana. My grandmother lived on a farm 5 miles north of that. My dad and uncle farmed her farmland. And in December of 2020, after a lot of paperwork, we laid out all the papers and they covered the kitchen floor. My husband and I purchased part of the family farm via the USDA's Young Farmers Loan Program. I'm the 4th generation in my family to own and plant that land.
The most promising thing I've seen is the adoption of regenerative farming practices. I hope that's where the future will be. We need federal subsidies to encourage small businesses, small food processors, local grocery stores. We have more research from our university, which means more knowledge about what works and what doesn't. That's really helpful, but all the same, you can see the influence of these big corporations everywhere.
When we left the closing, my dad was like, well, now you gotta pay for it, like he was just joking. And I remember thinking, we'll figure that part out. Of course, we have these huge loans from buying the land. And the farm, we just finished taxes. On paper, the farm lost money this last year. It just doesn't pencil out. We both have other jobs too, so there's other money coming in, otherwise it would be so much more stressful. And there are other things too. We pretty much have no choice but to put lots of chemicals and fertilizers on our land. And I have complicated feelings about that. How I explain it to myself is that, well, somebody's gonna put chemicals on this land, and I guess I'd rather it be me. And that sounds, it's excruciating to think about it sometimes. And even more so when the bill comes and I'm like, oh, we're paying to do this.
As a farmer myself, I understand how you become, well, dependent on the products of industry and intimidated by what would I do if I didn't have this? What am I going to do for insect problems if I don't have insecticides? What am I going to do for weeds if I don't have herbicides? What am I going to do for fertilizer if I don't have commercial fertilizers? And the answer is yes, all that can be addressed with regenerative farming practices, but it's not easy. It takes a different kind of farming operation and a different kind of thinking. It's possible. That's why the big corporations try to tell you that it's not. But I think we need more support for farmers trying to make that transition.
I'm a mother, and with one of my kids, I was reading about how with pollution everywhere, breast milk is polluted. It's terrifying. Here I am trying to do this healthy thing for my child, but I can't help but give him this tainted breast milk. I think about agriculture and ecology in relationship to motherhood. That urge to care, nurture, and protect my children. It extends to wanting to care for their home, our home. I mean, it extends beyond them, ideally to being able to take care of all children.
It's excruciating when I think about climate change. I feel so strongly about climate change that my husband and I do not have children by choice, simply because I worry for the next generation. I have 2 nieces whom I love. They are heirs if something happens to us. I worry for them too. I felt like I could not, in good conscience, bring kids. My goal all along is to be a 4th-generation farmer. And us not having kids means we're not going to have kids who are 5th-generation farmers.
I think about that word ecology. You know, it's rooted in the word home. When we say ecology, it can have this kind of abstract sort of sound to it. But really, it just means our home and how we care for our home.
Out on that gray December day after we finally bought the land, I wasn't scared at all. We didn't even notice we were picnicking on this cold, dreary day. It was wonderful. We took a bunch of pictures. I feel such a connection, so much love for this land and for the family history.
If you imagine yourself going from the city out into Illinois' big field of crops, how does that transition make you feel? What does it make you think?
Going out into the fields near where I live, it's like going into a factory where nature plays no role. The overuse of chemicals makes it feel like you would die inhaling.
Too few people. Too many communities eroded away.
When I go out into the city, I feel like I go into protective mode, like I'm out there to survive for myself, and there are more strangers than friends.
I think both the city and this big fields are unsustainable environments locked together in an unsustainable system. So that transition brings to mind what Ben Lerner calls the great majesty and murderous stupidity of the world system at the present time. And I wonder, how did we get here?
And there's so much separation between here and there, city streets and rural fields. People are so alienated from what actually goes into farming.
When I go out into the fields from the city, at first I'm inspired by all the wide, green open fields, but then after miles of soybean and corn, I can't help but feel a little bit discouraged by the lack of actual food.
Hold on, I've got to imagine that transition. I think for me it depends on the time of year. In winter, I find the transition a bit depressing, to be honest. There's actually, in some ways, more biological diversity on the town landscape than the farm one. But then, as things go along and crops begin to grow and the trees start greening up, then that transition makes me really happy. Even with the lack of diversity in our cropping system, you can still see all sorts of birds and small mammals. You can smell things out there.
Scene 2, cinnamon rolls.
So now it's kind of like I can eat something bad because I want to. I have the privilege now of eating something bad. Like this morning, I was eating a cinnamon roll, but, which I know is not the best thing one should envision when we're thinking about food. But there was a time, just because of where I lived in Chicago, that something like a cinnamon roll would have been the only thing that was available for me to eat. A food desert is a community that doesn't have a grocery store within an accessible distance. It's usually a poor black or brown community. In Chicago, there's a store, Mariano's. They actually said that they wouldn't build a grocery store in the neighborhood until the demographics changed. That's not my opinion, they actually said that. So you end up having to go across zip codes to get some nice things for dinner or maybe a piece of fruit. But it's not always convenient to have to take 2 buses and a train to go get groceries. So what do you end up doing? You go to the fast food restaurant, or you go to a local corner store that has, hairdresser accessories, liquor, candy, and then you think through what's available for you to eat. And it's all pre-packaged or frozen food. With the way that food access is woven into race and economics, you have people not just talking about food deserts, but about food apartheid.
I'm a manager at a local grocery co-op, and a co-op's not just owned by one guy. My coworkers and I, we like to remind each other that we're not working so some CEO can buy his second yacht. I like that. Certainly makes it easier to get up at 4 in the morning. I want to see more stores that are really supporting their community, supporting local vendors, supporting their staff with realistic wages and health benefits. Stores that understand they can make a genuine investment in their community's success.
South Shore Chicago used to be a food desert, but now there's a community grocery store. And I think it's worth mentioning that the residents of this community value that store so much that they protect it. During the uprisings of 2020 surrounding George Floyd's murder, the residents of this community literally surrounded the store with their bodies to protect it. You know, we have this thing, we're angry too, but this is a safe zone. You cannot destroy this grocery store. I think that's a beautiful way to illustrate the value of having a grocery store within a neighborhood. You wouldn't just let rage destroy it. You come together to protect it. I think that's a powerful state.
I think about where the money stays and where the money goes. Some places you're sending your dollars off to billionaire corporations someplace, and that money doesn't come back. But if you're buying from somewhere here, that money circulates through. People pay taxes on it. Keeping your money local means better road conditions. It means better schools. I think we should be saying that louder.
Because what happens when frozen food is the only thing available within your zip code? You know, kind of like me and my cinnamon roll, but what happens when you eat this meal after meal, week after week, month after month, year after year, and then you wonder, why does everyone have food allergies? Why does everyone have these comorbidities? Why is it that healthy food is only available within certain areas? I don't mean to flip this interview back onto you, but why do you think that is?
Scene 3, Lies and Dirt.
I also hate lying, and that's why transparency is so important to me. Because how do you catch a lie? If someone's lying about where the food comes from or how it's processed or anything, how do you catch them? And so one of the rules on our farm is complete transparency. Before the pandemic, we had thousands of people out on the farm every day. And we'd show them around, show them how we raise the animals, and answer questions directly. If they didn't like one of our answers, they could ask, why do you do it that way? And we'd tell them.
It's possible to balance productivity, profitability, and environmental health within crop systems. That's what regenerative ag is all about.
I often wonder, so what could you do? All right, take container products in grocery stores. You could have a law that requires all container products to have a picture of the animal where they actually spend the majority of their time. And if it's in a building, okay, an animal in a building. If it's outside, great, pasture it outside. Then the buyer could make a decision about what system they want to support. But we don't do that right now. If you go to the grocery store, you look at the milk, you're not going to see a picture of a cow chained up in a building standing in the same place for years almost at a time. You're going to see a picture of a couple of cows in a tall green grass field with the red barn in the background, and I can tell you that's pretty rare. I wish we had standards for telling the truth in advertising.
Well, here's what we're trying to do here at IRAI. We have seed funds for research and outreach projects that bring together university and non-university personnel so that they can engage in some form with regenerative agriculture. One of the projects we're working on, it's looking at selecting new chestnut cultivars for integrated agroforestry systems. Another is looking at a robotics application in agroforestry. And then a third is looking how to improve the food that's available to people in hospitals. So all of these projects, we're trying to figure out what can we actually do to move that needle. But it takes a lot of people. It takes pitching a big tent.
I try to take a systems approach in everything I do. You're not going to only think about one thing or the other, you know? Ecologists only think about the environment sometimes, and sociologists only think about the social dimension, and business guys only think about economics. But we've got to integrate all three of those at once. When we started to do that in the early 80s, we called it sustainable ag. Then big corporations got a hold of the language, and they said, oh, sustainable. We're sustainable too. There's no legal definition. There's no accountability in marketing.
Because right now, our ag policy isn't set up for you and me who eat. It's not set up for the farmers. It's not set up for grocery stores. It's not set up for any of us. It's set up so that Coca-Cola can get its massive amounts of corn syrup on a really cheap price point on a really regular schedule. And we're all tied to that. It's going to take all of us working together to get out of it.
My whole deal with transparency is not that you look at our animals and decide from there. It's that you look at the animals on our farm, you look at the animals in a large industrial process, and you decide which system you like better. And then, of course, there's money involved. It costs more to do it the way we do it than in a large industrial process, so our milk costs more money. And the buyer decides where they want their money to go.
Americans will not stomach the prices it would take to not have factory farms. I have neighbors raising chickens in polycultures. They're being successful, but they're not going to beat a $5 supermarket rotisserie chicken. So I think regulations are the way, just to make sure, but I don't know.
I think in order to get more people involved, we need to really understand all the goods that agriculture produces besides the very tangible ones, beyond the grains or lettuce or whatever. Agricultural practices can produce environmental benefits, like biodiversity and soil health. But it's not always possible to pay people for creating that kind of biodiversity. So I think we need to create the value systems in place that support farmers in being able to take up these practices. For example, in the Midwest, agroforestry hinges on farmers being able to sell nuts and berries. So we need to create a market for those nuts and berries. But it's not always about food either. You can use miscanthus to make plates, but we don't have the infrastructure for that kind of processing, and we also don't have that market for the large plates. But if we could do that, if we could build a system that values this and allows the selling of nuts and berries and miscanthus plates, then we're paying for cropping diversity. That gets us biodiversity. That gives us a way to pay farmers for taking up regenerative practices. I think if we can do that, we could see a repopulation of the countryside. And I think we'd even get an agriculture that's better for all of us.
Stories. I appreciate very much what you all are doing. It's so important that we keep coming together to work on this. And it's important that our universities are taking a role. In this project, the Voices on the Land, you said, I think that raising up these stories so people can hear them.
I grew up in a food desert.
When we closed on the farm, it was December 29th.
I'm an old farmer.
I'm a mother.
I think sharing these stories can show us how our choices affect each other, show us how we could work together.
It's about how we care for our home.
And then you think about money. You need to make a living.
But people are so alienated from where their food actually comes from.
And then I think about my grandmother and how much pleasure she got from growing her own food. I think I caught her enthusiasm for the quiet miracle of a seed turning into a plant and bearing an edible fruit.
Every farmer I've ever met, they consider themselves to be stewards of the land.
Honestly, I keep thinking I should be doing more.
But no farmer thinks of themselves as a destroyer. We can all feel springtime once that green starts sprouting up.
We come together to protect this. I think that's a powerful state. Food has never been possible without the people who sow it, tend to it, and are able to celebrate around it.
There's always birds out there, though. We didn't even notice we were picnicking on this cold, dreary day.
Thanks very much.